Hello everyone, Mr. Love here, coming to you from the Diesel Lab. Today we're going to be doing a valve adjustment on this B series Cummins here. This one's here is a 5.9, but it's the same for any of the B series. The 12 valve 5.9 here, or our little 4BT, stuff like that. It's going to be the same procedure, it's going to use the same manual, just there's 2 more cylinders on this one here. So a few things when we get started. Gonna make sure all our valve covers are removed off of there. This one has individual ones for each one, but if this was a more modern engine, it would just have one big valve cover on there for us to take off. Make sure everything's off to the side and organized good so you can put it back together in the order that it came off. We'll make sure it's fairly clean around here. Make sure we don't get a bunch of debris and stuff that falls down into the engine. On this one here, we just have the air compressor removed from this area here, just so we have room to get in for our little timing tool there that you'll see here in a minute. Usually you wouldn't have to take that off, you could reach in behind it. We just did it to make it a little bit easier to see in the video here. Also, we have a bunch of our lines and stuff out of the way just to clear this area up a little bit more. Normally all you'd have to do is clear the stuff off the top so you get to the valve cover. Other stuff we want to have out here, we need to have a shop manual or use the online instructions for it, because we're going to have to know our different valve lashes and the proper spot to set our engine at to do the adjustments on it. If we don't have a manual for some reason, a lot of times the valve clearance will be stamped onto the valve cover someplace or on one of the tags on it. Some of the other tools that we have out here today that we're going to need the torque wrench to torque these down afterwards. For this engine here, we need a special little timing tool. You'll see how that works here in a minute. We'll need a wrench and a screwdriver to do our actual adjustments. They do make specialty adjustment tools, but I always feel I could do it a lot more precise with the wrench and the screwdriver, and then we'll torque it down afterwards. We need a couple sets of feeler gauges here. It's always good to have offset ones and straight ones, because sometimes you can't get to all of them the way that you want to. I looked in the manual already. We're going to need a 10 thousandths and a 20 thousandths. The exhaust is usually always going to be more just because the exhaust heats up more, so the valves is going to expand more, so we're going to have more clearance on the exhaust normally. We're also going to need a ratchet to break our nuts loose on there. We don't want to ever back anything off with a torque wrench. Torque wrench is just for when we tighten it down, we don't want to back off with it. Also for today, we're going to be using a ratchet with a socket right off the front flywheel, off the dampener. We're going to be using it up there to turn it over instead of the actual turning tool made for the Cummins that turns off the back, just so we could get to everything a little bit easier for the video purpose. This is a lot easier if you're doing other adjustments on there or if you have 2 people. So we have our manual here. It's always good to check it out first to see what you actually need. Make sure you don't need any, specialty stuff or anything before you get started. So I've already read through these couple pages here, so we're all set to go. So what we're going to do, we're going to use our little timing tool here. We're going to turn our engine over so that our number 1 cylinder is on top dead center of the compression stroke. When that's all the way on top dead center, this little pin right here on the end of this should slide into our gear and lock into there. Once it's locked in there, we know we're all the way on top dead center, and we can adjust certain valves. So on our 6-cylinder one here, we're going to be able to adjust the intake and the exhaust on cylinder 1, the intake on cylinder 2, the exhaust on cylinder 3, the intake on cylinder 4, the exhaust on cylinder 5, and nothing on 6. Then you'll see we're going to rotate the engine over 180 degrees, and we're going to adjust all the rest of the valves. So let's get started. Okay, so now we're over at our engine. We're going to rotate the engine over in the direction of rotation. If you want to know the direction of rotation, you can either look in the manual to see which way it rotates, or you could bump the starter over to see which way it rotates that way. This one we know is a right-hand rotation engine, so we're going to turn this one clockwise. So you can either turn it from the front or the back, or use the timing or the adjustment tool, the turnover tool, but just make sure that it's going clockwise as you do it. So what we're going to be doing is we're turning this over here. As some of the cylinders come up on compression, you'll see it gets a little harder for some of them to go. But what we're watching for is the intake valve here to open. And for when the cylinder comes all the way up, after the intake valve opens and closes, then we know we're on top dead center of compression. This is where it comes in handy to know the 4 strokes of the engine, the intake, compression, power, exhaust. So our intake valve will open up. That means the air is being drawn into there. Then when the intake valve closes, the piston's traveling upwards. That's when our compression's happening. We want to be on top dead center of the compression stroke. So the piston all the way up as far as it can go on the compression stroke. So we'll start turning it over right now. You'll see our exhaust valve's actually starting to close right now. So we know we are on the exhaust stroke some point on there. Okay, you can see our intake valve starting to open now. So now we know we're on the intake stroke. Our intake valve's opening, our piston should be traveling down. We can't really see our piston in there right now, so this is where our timing tool is going to come in handy. On some engines don't have timing tools, you have to look for marks on the flywheel or pull out an injector and put like a piece of rod, like a coat hanger or something in there to know when the piston's coming all the way back up. Okay, so now we have our little timing tool here. There's a little hole back here. The air compressor is on here, it'd be a little hard to get into there, but that just slides in this hole right here. You can see that it doesn't slide all the way in right now. So what we're going to be doing, we're going to keep a light pressure on here with our finger, and we're going to keep turning over the engine in the direction of rotation. Then when we get to where everything's lined up, it's going to push in further for us, and it's going to lock it into place. So turn over nice and slow. Go nice and slow here because it's going to be coming up on the spot here in a second. We don't want to go too far. So then we'd have to go all the way around again. You never want to go backwards with it. Okay, so it just pushed in further for me. So now it's kind of locked in there. I don't want to force it any further. I want to leave everything right where it's at there. So I'm going to... Okay, so I got it right where I want it right now. So I'm going to pull the ratchet off the front of it. I'm going to pull my little tool out of there because we're done with the tool. We don't want to accidentally leave it in there and then crank the engine over because we could damage the tool or the gear. Usually these tools are made out of plastic, so they break pretty easily. AME made us up a bunch of these here just for our class purpose here. That way they last a little bit longer. Okay, so now we're ready to do some adjustments. So we know we have to do both the intake and the exhaust valve on cylinder 1 here. Cylinder 1 is going to always be the closest to the front of the engine. So you can usually tell which one's intake or exhaust either by looking in the manual or you can actually follow it from the manifold. So the exhaust manifold on this one's very easy to see. It lines right up with this one here, so we know this one's the exhaust. So this one's the intake here. So if we look down through, or if you looked in the book, you could also tell that our intake ones on this one are shorter, our exhaust ones are longer. So it's nice and easy to remember that on this one. So what I like to do, I like to go through and loosen up the ones that I need to right now. So remember, we're just going to use a regular ratchet to break them loose. We'll use the torque wrench to torque them back down. Okay, so I got my little book right here. So I loosened up the ones for intake and exhaust on cylinder 1. Now for cylinder 2, I'm going to do just the intake one, so the shorter one. Some of them are going to be pretty tight to begin with. Okay, then we go to cylinder 3. We're going to be doing the exhaust one, so the longer one on cylinder 3. You can see on this one I can't get in there. This is where we're going to have to use a wrench. On cylinder 3 here, we're going to be doing the exhaust one. So we'll break this one loose with a wrench, so you can't get in there good with a ratchet. Okay, So then on number 4, we're going to be doing the intake one. So we'll go back to using our ratchet just so we have a little more clearance here. Okay, cylinder 5, we're going to be doing the exhaust. Loosen that one up. Okay, now cylinder 6, we're just leaving alone for now. We'll be doing that on our next revolution here. Okay, so we can put our one ratchet away. We don't need that anymore. Okay, so now we're going to go through and actually adjust our valves here. So you can see we have our little jam nut backed off. And now we can, with a good screwdriver, you could freely rotate these around. Most of the time they're flathead screwdriver or some sort of Allen wrench on there. So what we're going to do, so this is the intake one, so this is going to be the 10,000. Remember, always refer to your book for the specs of it. Okay, so we're just going to tighten this down so there's just slight drag on here. We just want a little bit of drag. So just a little bit of drag on the feeler gauge. We're going to kind of let that hang out there. We're going to carefully put our wrench on here. And while holding the screwdriver here, without turning it, we're going to tighten down our jam nut all the way. So we'll put a little tension on the jam nut. We'll make sure we still have a nice slight drag on here. Got really nice good drag on here. Okay, so normally I'd go through and do that real quick with those ones. For this purpose here, we'll torque this one down right now just so you can see. Okay, so our torque here for these, according to our manual, is 216 inch-pounds. So we have slight pressure on here, so it shouldn't rotate any on us. So we're going to put this on here now. Just go to this clicks. It's only 216 inch-pounds, so not quite a bit. So we had that on there, and now we should still have slight drag. Yep. So if for some reason we went a little too tight with it, or this turned on us, and we had too much drag, we would just loosen it up and go again. Okay, let's go over to our exhaust one now. Our exhaust one's going to be 20 thousandths. Most of the time the exhaust one's going to be more. Okay, so we got our exhaust one in there now. We're going to tighten that down so we get slight drag on it. Okay, you can see I tightened it a little too far. I can't pull it out easy. We just want slight drag on there. So nice and slight drag. We'll let that hang out there. Okay, now we'll get our little wrench on there. For some engines, you might have to use specialty wrenches, like more of an offset ones just to get in there, or half moon ones, stuff like that, just so you get in there better. Okay, so we're going to hold our screwdriver tight. We're going to tighten that down a little bit there. We should still have nice slight drag here. Yep, I like it. Perfect right there. So we'll leave our feeler gauge there a second. We'll torque it down. Okay, so we're torqued down there. Always double check it after you torque it. Still make sure you have slight drag. If it's too tight or too loose, you'll have to loosen up the jam nut and go again. Okay, let's go on to our next one here now. So the reason I like to go through and loosen them up first is so you don't have to stare at the manual every time. You can just go to the ones that are loose, the next one in line. Okay, so our next one here is our intake one. So we're going to go back to our 10 thousandths. Same idea. Just tighten it down until we get slight drag on there. Tighten down our jam nut a little bit. We'll get our wrench on there. Whenever possible, you want to use the box end to end of it, just so it doesn't slip on you. Eventually, if you do this all the time, it's going to round these off here. So we'll hold our screwdriver steady. We'll snug that down a little bit there. Make sure we still have a slight drag on there. Get out our torque wrench. Torque it down. And make sure we still have slight drag on there. Very nice. Okay, so we're going good here. So now we go to our exhaust one on number 3 here. So our exhaust one's going to be 20. Okay, got a nice slight drag there. if you didn't want to use the box end and you're very careful using the open end one, you could come in there, it makes it a little bit faster. But if it's starting to round off or anything, you're going tight with it, definitely use the box end on it. Try to always use a socket whenever you can to break them loose, or a good 6-point wrench, just so you don't round them off. Okay, so we got it snug down a little bit. Got a nice good slight drag there. Give it a quick torque. Okay, we're torqued down. Still have good slight drag. Okay, we'll go on to our next one here. So our next one's intake on cylinder 4. So intake, we're going to go to 10 thousandths. Always helps when you have tables nearby or someplace good to set some wrenches. Okay, so again, we're on the intake, so 10 thousandths. Nice slight drag on there. Hold our screwdriver steady, tighten down our jam nut. Give it just a little snug on our jam nut there, kind of keep it where we want it to be. Still have slight drag. Grab our torque wrench. You can also wait to the end to go through and use the torque wrench, but you just want to make sure that it's not actually tightening on you. That way, you already have all the tools away and everything to go back. Okay, so nice slight drag. We're looking really good here. Okay, so our last one for this set here, we're going to be number 5, exhaust. So back to the long one here for the exhaust. It's going to be 20. Get out the correct one again. I put it away on that last one. Okay, so just to remind everyone, I'm looking at the number right here, the 20 thousandths. The one number underneath it, that's in millimeters. The book here actually tells us in both ways. It tells us in inches or in metric. So I'm just going off the inches one here. So 20 thousandths of an inch for the exhaust one here. On number 5. Exhaust is the long one. For this engine, it's not always that case, so always refer to the manual or trace it out the best way you can. This one here, our jam nut was a little too tight still, so I'm going to back it off a little bit more. Okay, so nice slight drag on there. Hold our screwdriver, tighten down our jam nut. This one I'll go without holding it with the screwdriver. You can see what happens. So without holding it as a screwdriver, I tighten this down. My little screw portion there actually turns, so now it's too tight there. So in that case, I would have to loosen it up again. Set my little drag here, so slight drag. Hold the screwdriver where I want it to. Snug it down a little bit, double check my drag. Nice slight drag. Torque it down here. Nope, you can actually see I went a little too tight, so at this portion we got to tear it apart again. So sometimes that happens when you're torquing it down too. So we'll go to, we have nice slight drag there. Turn it down with our wrench. Torque it down. And we have nice slight drag. So you can see why it's very crucial to snug the nut down where you want it to begin with before you torque it down. Otherwise it'll get all messed up on you. Okay, so nothing on cylinder 6. Okay, so let's go on to our next step here. For my next step here, what we're going to do, we're going to mark the flywheel in a part where we can kind of remember where it lines up. So here we're using just the front pulley here, the vibration dampener. You can do it on the flywheel on the back, or just if you didn't have a pulley on there, you could do it right on the crankshaft. We'll just mark it lightly. So now what we're going to want to do, we're going to want to turn it around 1 revolution. So we're going to turn it around the direction of rotation until this mark comes all the way back up to the top right where it was. And that'll allow us to adjust all the other valves that we haven't adjusted yet. So what that's basically doing is putting cylinder number 6 on top dead center of the compression stroke. So you'll see here, we have this marked. We're just going to rotate it around like we did before. We're going to bring that mark right back up to the top, and we'll be good to go. Starting to come around here, so we'll go nice and slow. Again, we don't want to go backwards with it. So we got it right back where we were now. Now, according to the manual, it tells us which valves we could go and adjust the rest of the way here. So basically, all the ones that we didn't do before, we could adjust now. So since you've already seen the adjustment procedure, we'll just go through real quick and tell which ones we can adjust now that we went all the way over. Okay, so on number 2 now, we could do the exhaust one. On number 3, we could do the intake. On number 4, we could do the exhaust. On number 5, we do the intake. And then on number 6, we could do both the intake and the exhaust. Normally, just by looking at it too, you could kind of see which ones you could adjust. You just don't really want to do it that way. You want to actually do it when there's no tension whatsoever on there. But the ones you could definitely tell right now that you can adjust are the ones that are starting to push down and have a little bit of tension on them. So all the ones we could adjust, we should be able to rock back and forth a little bit. But you want to go by what the manual tells us to do, which ones to adjust. So that's pretty much how to do the valve adjustment on any engine. Remember, always refer to the owner's manual on it or the online instructions for it. But what you could do if you don't have a manual or anything, you could actually get each cylinder up on top dead center compression. Because when we're on compression, that's when we know that we don't have any valves opened whatsoever. Because that's when all the, we don't want any intake valve open or exhaust open. Because at the top dead center compression, that's when we're going to inject the fuel in there and have our power stroke, explosion inside there. So we know for sure that both valves are shut on that one. So that's why we adjust them on top dead center there. So if we had to, if we didn't have a manual or anything, we could just go down through each one, rotate it over so we could see the intake valve open and close. Then if we had an injector pulled out, we could tell when the piston's all the way up on top dead center. And then we would no, you could also mark the flywheel for each, degree of rotation if you wanted to get technical with it, but it's usually faster just to refer to the owner's manual if you can and go through them real quick. Once you have all that done, just reassemble the valve covers, all that stuff. Make sure all your timing tools and stuff are out of the way. Make sure everything's sealed back up good. If you pull out the valve cover, it's usually good to replace the gaskets or at least put a little fresh RTV on them to get them to seal good. You don't want them to start leaking on you going down the road. You should do valve adjustments according to the owner's manual. At Casella, where I worked before, we did them once a year. Some of the over-road truck companies that I know that run thousands and thousands of miles each year, they do them a few times a year, usually around like the 50,000 mile mark or something like that.